6-year-old Dennis Martin walked behind a bush to surprise his family. They were watching, but he never came out. That was 1969. He has never been found and is not alone. Every year, thousands of people enter America's national parks. Most come back. Some don't. And for a handful of them, experienced hikers, young children, couples in love, there is no explanation. No body. No evidence. No answers. Just a person who walked into the wilderness and simply ceased to exist. These are 10 of those cases. June 14th, 1969. Father's Day. The Martin family had come to Great Smoky Mountains National Park for a camping trip. Dennis was 6 years old. Bright. Energetic. The kind of kid who couldn't sit still at a tea around 4:30 in the afternoon. Dennis and a group of other children decided to play a game. They would split up, sneak around, and surprise the adults from different directions. Dennis went left. Behind a bush. Into a small cluster of trees. His father watched him go. He waited for Dennis to jump out. He never did. Within minutes, the family was searching. Within the hour, rangers were called. Within 24 hours, one of the largest search and rescue operations in Smoky Mountains history had begun. Hundreds of searchers, military personnel, trained dogs, aircraft. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace of a 6-year-old boy in a bright red t-shirt. There was one reported sighting. A family camping nearby claimed they heard a terrifying scream from the direction Dennis had disappeared. They described seeing what they thought was a large wild figure moving through the trees carrying something. Investigators took the report seriously. They found nothing. Dennis Martin has never been found. No remains. No evidence. No explanation. He would be in his early 60s today. Dennis Martin vanished in seconds, with his family watching, on a clear afternoon. But in 1981, something just as unexplainable happened, this time with a witness watching every single step. Yosemite National Park. July 17th, 1981. Stacy Arras was 14 years old. She had come to Yosemite with her father and a group of family friends for a horse riding trip. They had set up camp at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, a remote but well-traveled area of the park. That morning, Stacy told the group she wanted to walk down to a nearby lake to take photographs. It was roughly 400 yards away. A short walk. A clear path. Open terrain. One of the men in the group, George Pollock, decided to walk partway with her. He watched her the entire time. Stacy walked ahead of him toward the lake. At a certain point, Pollock stopped and watched from a distance as she continued toward the water. She sat down on a rock near the shoreline. He looked away for a moment. When he looked back, she was gone. Pollock assumed she had simply walked further along the shoreline. He returned to camp and waited. Stacy never came back. A search was immediately launched. Rangers covered every inch of the area around the lake. The terrain was open. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to fall that wouldn't leave evidence. They found one thing. A single lens cap from a camera. Near the rock where Pollock had last seen her, nothing else. No body. No camera. No Stacy. She has never been found. Investigators had no explanation. George Pollock had watched her the entire time. She was in open terrain. She simply stopped being there. No trace. No explanation. A witness watching the entire time. But this next case doesn't just have no explanation. It has no logic whatsoever. Because how do two people vanish from a perfectly intact boat? Before we go further into the modern era, we have to talk about Glen and Bessie Hyde. Because this case doesn't just have no explanation. It has no logic. November 1928. Glen Hyde was 26. Bessie was 22. They were newlyweds. On what Glen described as a honeymoon adventure, an attempt to navigate the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon by wooden scow. A flat-bottomed boat. Entirely handmade. The plan was ambitious. Dangerous. People told them not to go. They went anyway. For weeks they made progress. They stopped at various points along the river. People saw them. Spoke to them. They were alive, well, and in good spirits. Then on November 18th, they simply stopped appearing. A search was launched. Rescuers found the boat. It was floating perfectly upright on the Colorado River, completely intact. No damage, no signs of struggle. Inside the boat they found all of Glen and Bessie's supplies, their food, their equipment, Bessie's diary, everything exactly as it should be. Except Glen and Bessie were gone. No bodies were ever found. No evidence of what happened. The river was searched extensively. The canyon walls were examined. Nothing. How did two people vanish from a perfectly intact boat on a river with canyon walls on both sides? Nobody has ever been able to answer that. Glen and Bessie Hyde were never found. A boat found perfectly intact. Two people gone. But disappearances like this aren't limited to rivers and canyons. Sometimes they happen on a trail, in broad daylight, with no water in sight. But in 1997, something happened on a trail in Wyoming that investigators still cannot explain. July 24th, 1997. Shoshone National Forest, Wyoming. Amy Wroe Bechtel was 24 years old, a competitive runner training for an upcoming race. She was fit, experienced, and knew the area well. That afternoon, Amy told her husband Steve she was going to run a loop trail in the forest to scout it for an upcoming race she was helping organize. She drove to the trailhead. She was seen at a local store near the park buying supplies just before she headed out. That was the last confirmed sighting of Amy Wroe Bechtel. When she didn't return home that evening, Steve reported her missing. Searchers found her car at the trailhead exactly where she had parked it. They searched the trail. They searched the surrounding forest. They searched for weeks. They found nothing. They found nothing. No Amy. No running gear. No evidence of what happened on that trail. The investigation turned toward her husband Steve. He was investigated extensively. Ultimately, no charges were ever filed. The trail Amy was running that day was not remote. It was a known route. People used it regularly. How does an experienced runner vanish on a familiar trail in broad daylight? Amy Wroe Bechtel has never been found. Her case remains officially open. An experienced runner. A familiar trail. Gone without a trace. But what happens when someone vanishes and leaves their food still cooking? Olympic National Park, Washington, 1997. Olympic National Park, Washington, 1997. Martha Solve was an experienced outdoors woman. She had camped and hiked in Olympic National Park many times before. She knew what she was doing. On the day she disappeared, Martha told fellow campers she was going for a short solo walk. Just a brief stretch. She would be back shortly. The campers waited. She didn't come back. When they went to check on her, they found her campsite exactly as she had left it. Her tent was set up. Her sleeping bag laid out. Her food was still cooking over the camp stove. Like she had simply stood up and walked away mid-meal. Search and rescue teams combed the surrounding area, the trails, the forest, the nearby water sources. Martha Solve was never found. No remains. No equipment found away from camp. No explanation for why an experienced camper with food still on the stove walked away and never came back. Martha Solve was never found. If you're finding these cases as disturbing as I am, make sure you subscribe. We cover cases like these every single week. And trust me, it only gets stranger from here. Food still cooking. Tents still standing. Gone. But at least in Martha's case, there were no checkpoints. No monitoring. This next case had both, and it still made no difference. Mount Rainier National Park, Washington, 1988. Mount Rainier National Park, August 1988. Joe Keller was an experienced hiker. He knew mountains. He knew trails. He was not the kind of person who got lost. On August 8th, Joe set out alone on a day hike in Mount Rainier. The weather was clear. The trail was well marked. Rangers noted his entry at a checkpoint on the way in. He never checked out. When rangers realized Joe hadn't returned, they launched a search. They retraced his route. They covered the surrounding terrain. What they found made no sense. The trail Joe was hiking had only one logical entry and exit point. Rangers had been present at that point throughout the day. Joe had entered. He had not exited. Somewhere on that trail between the entry checkpoint and the exit, Joe Keller ceased to exist. No body, no equipment, no signs of a fall or injury. An experienced hiker, clear weather, a marked trail, a monitored entry and exit. Gone. Joe Keller has never been found. One entry, one exit. Rangers watching both. Still gone. But this next case takes that exact same impossibility and makes it even harder to explain. Yellowstone National Park. Summer, 2003. Yellowstone National Park. Summer 2003. David Strauch was by all accounts a capable and experienced outdoorsman. He was not someone who took unnecessary risks in the wilderness. On the day he disappeared, David was hiking between two ranger checkpoints in Yellowstone. Both checkpoints were staffed. Rangers at the first checkpoint confirmed David had passed through heading toward the second. He never arrived. Rangers at the second checkpoint had been present the entire time. David had not passed through. Somewhere between those two checkpoints, David Strauch vanished. Search teams covered every inch of terrain between the 2 points. The area was not vast. It was not particularly remote. It was a section of trail between two staff positions. David Strauch was never found. How does a person vanish on a monitored trail between two staffed ranger checkpoints? Nobody has been able to explain it. David Strauch was never found. Vanished between two staff positions. No way in, no way out. But what if someone did everything right? What if they actually sent their exact GPS location to their family and still couldn't be found? Sequoia National Park, California, 2014. Sequoia National Park, California, 2014. Stephen Eubank was hiking alone in Sequoia when he sent a text message to his family with his GPS coordinates. He was checking in, letting them know where he was. It was a responsible thing to do. His family received the message. They had his exact location. When Stephen didn't return, they contacted rangers and provided the coordinates. Search teams went directly to the location Stephen had texted from. They found signs he had been there, but Stephen was gone. Search teams expanded the search outward from his last known coordinates. They searched for days. Stephen Eubank was never found. He had given his family his exact location. Searchers went directly there and still found nothing. How does someone vanish from a location they themselves provided? The case has never been resolved. Stephen Eubank was never found. His exact coordinates. Searchers went directly there. Still gone. Now this next case is completely different from everything you've heard so far, because this person was actually found. But what happened to him during the time he was missing has never been explained. Tug Hill Plateau, New York, February 2018. February 7th, 2018. Tug Hill Plateau, New York. Danny was skiing with a group of fellow firefighters from Toronto, experienced skiers on a familiar trail. Danny Filippidis was a firefighter from Toronto. Fit, experienced, someone who knew how to handle himself in difficult situations. At one point, Danny skied slightly ahead of the group, just for a moment, around a bend in the trail. When the group came around the bend, Danny was gone. They searched the immediate area. Nothing. They called for help. An extensive search was launched covering the ski trails and surrounding forest. No Danny. For 6 days, searchers found nothing. His family flew in from Canada. The story made national news. Then on February 13th, 6 days after he vanished in upstate New York, Danny Filippidis was found in Sacramento, California, 3,000 miles away. Danny was physically unharmed, but he had no memory of how he got there. He could not explain the 6 days. He could not explain California. He had no recollection of anything between skiing around that bend and finding himself on the other side of the country. Investigators looked into every possible explanation. Foul play. Mental health episode. Voluntary disappearance. No definitive explanation was ever established. Danny Filippidis skied around a bend in upstate New York and somehow ended up in California 6 days later with no memory of how. Nobody has ever explained it. Danny Filippidis skied around a bend and was never the same. 3,000 miles away. No memory. No explanation. And if you think that's disturbing, the last case isn't one person. It's a pattern. A pattern that nobody in authority seems to want to talk about. Tug Hill Plateau, New York. The final case. The final case isn't one person. It's a pattern. Researcher and former lawman David Paulides spent years compiling missing persons cases from national parks across the United States. What he found disturbed him enough to dedicate years of his life to documenting it. The cases he identified share characteristics that have no logical explanation. Victims frequently disappear in good weather on familiar terrain. Experienced outdoors people. Children who vanish within sight of adults. People who disappear between two known points with no logical exit. Bodies, when found, are sometimes located in areas that had already been thoroughly searched. Sometimes found miles from where they disappeared in terrain that should have been impossible for them to reach. Sometimes found without shoes, without the clothing they were wearing when they vanished. Dogs trained to track human scent frequently lose the trail suddenly. Not gradually. Suddenly. As if the person simply stopped leaving a scent at a specific point. Paulides documented hundreds of these cases. He brought them to the National Park Service and asked for their missing persons data to cross-reference. The National Park Service told him they don't keep that data. The agency responsible for millions of acres of American wilderness keeps no centralized record of people who go missing within it. Paulides found that strange. So do a lot of other people. The cases continue. People continue to vanish in America's national parks with no explanation. And the pattern continues to have no answer. The pattern continues to have no answer. 10 people, 10 parks, 10 disappearances with no logical explanation. Some of them were children. Some were experienced hikers who knew exactly what they were doing. Some disappeared in open terrain with witnesses watching. Some vanished between 2 points that should have made disappearance impossible. None of them have ever been explained. America's national parks cover over 85 million acres. They are vast. They are wild. And somewhere within them, people continue to disappear. If this video kept you up, you're not alone. Drop in the comments which case disturbed you the most. I read every single one. And if you want more cases like these, the next video is already waiting for you. Don't say I didn't warn you.